name's Rachel Kelly, and I'm a journalist by background. So I worked at the Times newspaper for 11 years in the newsroom. I was a reporter in my 20s and early 30s, and I then suffered a major depressive episode, and I'll tell you more about that. But basically, I then did recover, but I then had a second major depressive episode, and these two big episodes really sort of became the defining events of my life. And I then decided I really sort of had to completely reinvent myself and have a kind of completely new identity. So in a way, the second half of my life has been working as a mental health advocate, as a writer, as a speaker, running workshops, and always from the point of view of sort of lived experience of somebody who's found life quite tricky and has suffered anxiety and depression, but also somebody who's recovered. So you're the expert, Ali, you're the doctor, and I'm the patient, in the sense that I'm the person.
No, I'm not an expert. I've literally just qualified.
Right.
I'm a spring chicken.
Okay, well, there's no hierarchy. I don't believe in hierarchies. But yes, I think that's where I'm coming from. I'm coming from the point of view of someone with lived experience of severe anxiety and depression, and then trying to find ways to feel better.
And just to come in on what you said about, you know, the doctor being the expert, I think we can learn so much from patients' lived experience. And there's so much coming up at the moment around experts by experience. You'll see them giving so many talks, and it's becoming more of a thing within medical education as well, that when you're learning about a chronic condition, it's so useful to have an expert by experience actually give you their account rather than just learning it out of the textbook. And I know your daughter's at Bristol Medical School, isn't she?
Yes, I think she's tuning in tonight. I better not think about that, because I'll be very self-conscious if I imagine that she's listening. Yes, so she's a third year medic at Bristol Medical School. She's currently at Bath Royal Infirmary, so she's living on site.
I was there, yeah.
Right.
Horrible accommodation. I don't know what she said.
Yeah. Well, she's sort of she's very homey, so she likes to make wherever she is quite nice. So I think she's taken her nice duvets and stuff. Yeah, and she's working in A&E at the moment. She's doing that 4-week stretch in A&E, and you know, it's wonderful actually, because you know, I am so interested in psychology, mental health, psychiatry, all these fields, and so it's really special for me. And maybe in another life I might have been a doctor. So it's sort of lovely in a way. My wish is coming through her.
Yeah, no, my mom kind of said the same to me actually. She's a doctor's daughter, and she always said that she wished she could have been a doctor, and so she kind of lives vicariously through me.
Right. Yeah.
I know you've done some sort of level with your counselling training though, which I know is so invaluable to people.
Thank you. Yes. So I did the foundation course at Regent's College in London, the Foundation in Psychotherapy and Counselling, which is a sort of broad introduction to counselling, and it's something I might go back to. I'm still quite interested in developing that, but it's another 3 years. It's a big commitment. So I'm a mum, and you know, I felt at the time I hadn't quite got enough time to give to that. So again, I think that it's a sort of funny mixture between coming from.
Oh, you've lost sound.
Did you lose?
There you are. We're back. I lost you for a few seconds,
sorry,
sound-wise, but
yes, sorry, that was just somebody ringing. I probably should switch it off. Here we are, silent mode. Yeah, I mean, it's something I slightly struggled with actually. You know, so like, who am I to talk about this stuff? You know, and I'm, you know, am I an expert? Quote. And one thing I found recently, which I found quite reassuring, is that actually the word expert comes from experience. So I've got a sort of funny. I've got my own personal experience, and then I've got, you know, as I say, a sort of that foundation in psychotherapy. But I think I've learned quite a lot working mainly with the charities, because I've run workshops for people who suffer from anxiety and depression alongside those charities. And so I suppose I feel I spent a lot of time with other people with lived experience. So I don't know if that makes me an expert, and I'm not even sure that it matters. But yeah, it's a bit of you know, I suppose a constant curiosity and learning, you know, wherever that learning comes.
Completely. And I think it's amazing that you're surrounded by so many other people who've shared their experiences with you, that you can also learn pieces from them. And it's such a nice
Oh,
exchange. Like you mentioned, the non-hierarchical thing, you're both helping each other. It's that ebb and
yeah.
flow. And I think that's so important for a dialogue and for any kind of compassionate conversation, that it's not just one way.
Yeah, I think it's been really important for me to sort of stay quite grassroots.
Mm,
And because I feel myself to be well and recovered now. And, it's been a long time getting there, and, never say never. But I want to stay in touch with people's concerns and, what their experience is, and also what their kind of care they're receiving, and, what's their experience of NHS treatment, and, where
mm,
they're finding things helpful. So, that's why I think I particularly value this work with local offices of these charities. Like,
mm,
so Rethink is part of Mind, and Mind has lots of local centres, and they often put on things for people who are finding life difficult. So, mindfulness groups or nutrition groups, and that's how I've kept
mm.
sort of quite grassroots. And yeah, I think you make a good point there as well. It's something very powerful and reassuring in a way about our kind of common humanity, and that we all
Yeah,
share,
absolutely.
and people from all sorts of different backgrounds. And I come from a certain kind of professional world, and there are some issues there, but things that I bring certain things, but then I learn from people from all sorts of different worlds. And there's a lot of commonality of experience, actually.
Completely. Completely. And I just think that's so important, that at the end of the day, mental illness, unfortunately, is an equalizer. Everyone
Yeah,
has mental health, and 1 in 4 are affected by mental illness, no matter what, socioeconomic class you are, what race you are, what ethnicity you are, what culture you are, what gender you are all at risk of developing a mental illness in your life. And I'm learning that at the moment now. I think I told you about the work I'm doing. I'm working on an all-male psychiatric intensive care unit in Notting Hill. So in a PQ with really ill people who have experienced lots of relapses of psychosis, and they're all men, aged 20 to 40. And I found so many ways of being able to relate to them. We've been doing the cooking group. We've been doing something which I know you'll love because of your interest in writing. We've been doing this amazing group. It was called Well Read, and essentially an actress from the community, it's all on Zoom unfortunately at the moment still because of COVID, but an actress from the community leads a kind of play recital group, so everyone takes a part and then you read out that part. And that's been amazing. And just those kind of common shared activities have really allowed me to relate to people that are from complete different backgrounds, have complete
yeah,
different experiences. But it's really amazing that I think through these tools, and I know you have like a whole set of well-being tools that you talk about in your latest book, but I think it's
yeah.
amazing to be able to relate to people through these shared activities.
That's a really nice point. I mean, there's a couple of things there that you mentioned that really sort of resonates. I think, the idea, the commonality of everybody suffers and everybody has mental illness. And I think that's definitely the thing I struggled with. And I think,
Mm,
the idea that, you can have a privileged life, but not necessarily have a privileged health. And I've been very interested in sort of stigma as well, that,
yeah.
it's almost like, if you've got a job and a house and a partner, who are you to sort of be mentally unwell? So I'm sort of particularly interested in the sort of middle world of, I don't know, journalists, doctors, bankers, lawyers, people with their own
Yeah.
businesses. And they are often the group that still, even though, so much has been done on stigma, but they still find it really hard to come forward and put
Mm,
their hand up and say, I'm not feeling well. Whereas, if you're suffering from real social deprivation and you can't put bread on the table, there's almost a sort of expectation, oh yeah, you might suffer there from a bit of mental illness. Or actually also, in a way, there's quite a lot of the celebrities who've come forward. It's sort of
mm,
like, well, you've got this crazy up and down wild life. Yeah, you might be a bit bipolar kind of thing. But this kind of more, as I say, this sort of middle world. Yeah, so
mm,
that's the first point. And I think there's a really interesting second point you made, that about sharing activities and
mm.
finding things in common. That the activities themselves can be helpful, but there's this sort of turbocharge when we do them as a group. So it's so funny. I feel very bonded because I've worked up at St Charles's as well, in the St
Oh, I
Charles.
didn't know this.
Yes, in
Yeah.
the Wellbeing Centre there. So Mind
Mm,
run one of their groups up there, and I've run some cooking work there. I run good mood food workshops, and I've used their kitchens there. And I've also run a reading group there for quite a while, actually. So it's a little bit like, I call them my healing words workshops. And I know something we both share is a sort of love of poetry. But what happens is the sort of group of us, there are about 15 in that group, and each week we share 5 or 6 poems in a kind of there's a sort of narrative of how these poems might help you. But it is about sharing and being together that is as important as actually the fact that, you know, if you're on your own, you can read a poem, or if you're sitting alone, you can chop an onion, and that can be therapeutic and helpful too. But the group thing, I think, is huge, especially at the moment when people have felt very isolated.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think we've so missed social connection and human touch, and I think it's so powerful that, I mean, I've witnessed the virtual groups on Zoom actually still being able to get a really brilliant response, but I think it's going to be all the more amazing when people can unite in groups, because there really is that sharing that same physical space. Like for me, I always use the example because it's my favorite type of visual art, the cinema, which I can't wait to reopen. When you're in that shared physical space and you're all engaged in the same activity, you've got the same focus, the same concentration, the same shared goal, I think that is where so much healing can happen, and so much suffering.
And I mean, this might sound a bit woohoo, and I'm not a scientist, but I do feel as well there's a sort of energy thing, there's something kinetic, and actually being physically with people. I actually think you can sometimes get it on a screen, but obviously not to the same extent. But there is something about a kind of molecular energy of literally people being together, and that kind of sort of creation almost of everybody, the different energies coming together. But it's interesting, so working with the charities particularly this week, and actually in the last couple of weeks, people are quite anxious about these social joining up again, and you know, what are the rules and how we're going to do it. And I think that's something coming up a lot for people at the moment. And you know, I've been trying to work with people and, you know, sharing good strategies about what are the ways to reconnect and how we're going to do it without, you know, feeling too frightened. And So
what advice would you have in terms of this graduated approach to getting back to what was normal?
Well, I'm sure if you heard of this idea of exposure therapy, like
that was literally, oh my god, it's like in my head. I was literally just going to ask you. I was going to say, are you going to go the exposure therapy route, or are you going to go the baby steps route?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I'm working the sort of a sort of funny hybrid in a way, in the sense that, so I'm sure, you know, maybe people know about exposure therapy, but the idea being is that if you keep doing sort of the safety behaviors, so maybe at that moment that would be like staying in, or not going back to the office, or not meeting up with friends, you think that's where the safety is, to keep doing these sort of safe behaviors, but actually they're setting you up for more anxiety. And the way out of the anxiety is you've got to, you know, little by little step away from those safety behaviors and take slightly more what you might perceive as risk-taking behaviors, but to do them in a very gradual way. And the thing that people seem to really like at the moment is if you can make those associations with something really fun and pleasurable. So I'm actually doing a workshop at the moment, which is, you know, from frightening to fun. So the idea being that, you know, say you're nervous about stepping out of the house for the first time, then make an association that makes that a fun activity. So whether that's actually treating yourself to a nice coffee, or, you know, linking the stepping out of the house with actually seeing somebody you really want to see. And then little by little, you're mentally sort of making new associations, and you'll be able to reduce the anxiety. Yeah, so I think that's quite a nice one. There's another one which I'm using at the moment, which I think people really like. I don't know if you've heard of this German word called stammtisch. So stammtisch, the idea of it is that you make a group, and obviously because of being the rule of 6, and actually 6 is thought to be a good number for a stammtisch, 6 to 8 they say. And basically you decide that this particular group, every week, or most people are doing it every fortnight, you're all going to meet in the same place at the same time, and you know, just meet up for a drink or a cup of tea or whatever it is. And it's quite clever because there's a lot of reawakening kind of FOMO, and if you have a stammtisch, then you're never fear of missing out, because you're always invited. You're never not going to be included. And it's a little bit like therapy, which is that, you know, the people in the group know your story. So you don't have to complete every time, sort of start all over again, because they're up to speed because they saw you a fortnight before. And I've got quite a lot of people doing that and just starting out and, you know, making a group. It doesn't have to be even as many as 6, and just having this sort of regular thing. And again, it helps with this sort of, you know, gradual easing out. And the last thing that I've been using with groups, which they seem to really like, is using some of the visualization and the imagery. So the image that seems to be helping is of a chrysalis turning into a butterfly. And like, you know, if you pull a butterfly out too quickly of the chrysalis, you know, you'll break its wings and it's not going to fly. Whereas you just let it grow out at its own pace. So the invitation there, just to sort of go at your own pace and not rush people, not force them, just allow them to find that sort of, you know, what's the right pace for them.
I have an absolute obsession with butterflies. I got a very silly butterfly tattoo about 8 years ago because I've always loved them. From my grandma to my mom to me, it's always been like a symbol. I've always had little presents around butterflies, and it's always kind of been a metaphor for me around transformation. And
right,
I love that. I think that's such a wonderful metaphor, and it's very comforting, and it's very much in line with Mental Health Foundation's theme of nature and mental health for this week, because we can learn so much from nature and so much from these life cycles of these creatures that sometimes we don't even notice when we're in such a rush.
And again, I think, yeah, I love that. As you say, it's sort of something like, you know, sometimes we almost give ourselves too much agency. I'm all for empowerment and taking responsibility, but sometimes I like this idea that we're part of something bigger, a sort of scientific universe, and that, you know, we have our own, you know, we can trust in a way to sort of natural processes and just slightly sort of give up trying to fix and sort everything all the time. Just allow ourselves to just kind of, that I don't know, not quite go with, yeah, I suppose go with the flow. Yeah, and I like, yeah, the healing power of nature. Actually, funny enough, my next book is going to be yeah, using the device of nature. It's actually bringing nature together with poetry, because I became really interested in the idea that actually maybe we shouldn't be talking about mental health. You know, maybe we should talk about emotional health, because, you know, so much of we're always in our heads, we're always in our thoughts. It's always mental, it's always cognitive. And actually, for a lot of people, you know, emotions are what people find difficult. And I think that was definitely true for me. And you probably heard that idea that depression can sometimes be anger turned in, especially for women, that actually they're quite angry. And even though it's taken me ages to sort of really work out what was the root of my own breakdowns, I think there was some anger there, you know, that I was trying to be all things to all people. I was being the mum. I was working hard at that time. I was in the newsroom at the Times. I had 2 small children, and it was always about trying to sort of meet the needs of others. And you know, being selfish has got a bit of a bad rap, but actually if you don't look after yourself. But anyway, so the point being of being in touch with your feelings and using them as quite a useful GPS system. So I've put together something about how poetry can help us get in touch with our feelings, and I've used the sort of device of the seasons as a way to organize that. So, you know, sort of winter feelings or more spring-like hopeful feelings, but and the poetry that can sort of help us access those feelings. So yeah, it's a big enthusiasm of mine, actually, nature plus poetry. And indeed, of course, poets love nature.
Completely, all the romantics, for
Yeah,
sure. We just have so much in common, from the poetry to the foods to the writing. I love it. So I was reading something interesting about you last week, that you are able, it's like the most amazing skill, to recite a comforting poem in 26 seconds. So
oh really?
I saw I
Okay.
saw this on your blog, that you were doing something around comforting poems, reading a comforting poem in 26 seconds.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, yeah, well, I'll share a poem that I do really find very comforting. And you know, you might have to sort of almost make a bit of a sort of psychic shift, because it's a religious poem, and it's a poem from the 17th century. So the language might feel a little bit off-putting, you know, a bit like if you go to a play, you almost have to make a sort of, you know, just sort of mentally switch into a different gear. But in this poem, it's called Love, and it's by George Herbert. what you'll hear, I think, is you'll hear these two voices. And for me, these were the two voices of a kind of compassionate, loving voice, which is the voice of kind of recovery and hope and where I feel I am now, versus a kind of depressed, not good enough voice. And there's a sort of dialogue between these two voices, and the loving voice comes out on top. But I'll share it with you, see what you think, and see if it talks to you. Okay, so it's called Love, and it's by George Herbert. Love bade me welcome, yet my soul drew back, guilty of dust and sin. Yet quick-eyed love, observing me grow slack from my first entrance in, sweetly questioned if I lacked anything. What, I, the unkind, the unworthy? Lord, I cannot look on thee. Love, smiling, did reply, who made the eyes but I? Truth, Lord, but I've marred them. Let my shame go where it doth deserve. And know you not, says Love, who bore the blame, you must sit and taste my meat. So I did sit and eat. Yeah.
That's really beautiful.
Thank you.
Really, really lovely. How did you stumble upon it? I feel like it really encapsulates the two kind of sides to someone, the kind of negative self-talk and the kind of ambitious side.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think really it's powerful. I've done years of different kinds of therapy, and for me, I feel in 3 verses it sums up so much what I've learned in therapy, which is to hear this different voice in my head, which isn't the negative self-loathing voice, but this sort of loving voice. I mean, I did study the metaphysical poets at school, so George Herbert in this group of poets with people like John Donne and Andrew Marvell, and I didn't really kind of experience it in a very dramatic way, though I did like it at school. But when I was ill and I was in a psychiatric hospital, and I was very I don't know if you can be very suicidal, but I was suicidal because I was just in such pain. I'm really interested in how mental illness can express itself physically, and we've got this split between mind and body, but actually we haven't. They're just one and the same. And my mum was with me. She was sitting by my bed, and she started sort of feeding positive lines because I was lying there screaming, saying, I want to die, I want to die. And then she would sort of read little lines to me. And actually the first was from the Bible. I mean, I do feel I'm religious in the sense I do believe in a higher power. And she fed me this line that said, your strength is made perfect in weakness, which is a line from Corinthians in the Bible. And then she started this love one, love bade me welcome, yet my soul drew back. And the line guilty of dust and sin. I mean, I don't think I know a better description of severe depression than that you feel guilty of dust and sin, because it's such an amazing line, because it's that physicality of it. I mean, you feel awful. You feel like dust and sin. I felt that was so I couldn't find the words to describe it. And it just meant I felt so I felt less alone.
Yeah.
And it was amazing. It was like this sort of hand across these centuries that someone from the 17th century was like reaching out and saying, yeah, I know what it's like to feel like this, but actually, there is another way. I think he wouldn't have been diagnosed at the time, Herbert, with depression, but I'm almost certain that he had it, because most of his poems are about trying to find this other voice. So yeah, it meant a huge amount to me, and I don't know. I don't know if anybody else.
No, it definitely. Yeah, I mean, whoever's listening, do give your thoughts if it resonated with you. It definitely resonated with me, and everything you've said, and this wonderful book I have here, because as I've told you before, I too have suffered from depression, and it happened bang in the middle of medical school. It was a very complex time, but Guilty of Dust and Sin, I think, is so absolutely spot on with how it feels. And also to say that it is incredible, this intergenerational education and evidence that we have, that mental health and poor mental health has always existed on a spectrum. We just didn't have the language and the kind of
Yeah.
economy of language to actually be able to label it. And so you know, when I discuss mental illness with my parents' generation and the generation above them, so we all felt this way, we just didn't know what to call it, you know, and
Yeah.
so it was never spoken about. And I think it's so brilliant now that we are able to have such open conversations and really be able to identify the emotions. And
Yes.
you know, in your book, I was going over a few of my favorite lines in it last night. I found it so striking that you said it was in your early 30s with your second child is when you
Yeah.
went through your first major depressive episode, that you didn't know what this wretched feeling was. You questioned whether it was cancer. You had no idea that this was what depression looked like. And I think that's absolutely fascinating with how you were then and how much you know now.
Yeah. Yeah,
And
no,
yeah.
I mean, I actually remember thinking maybe I was having a heart attack because I had this sort of racing heart and felt, you know, in such physical discomfort and, you know, this kind of anxiety-driven depression. I know, you know, some people for it presents as like a low mood or a lassitude, but, you know, for me, it's always this sort of anxiety-driven way. And yeah, I actually was stunned when I saw, you know, the doctor said, "Oh, I'm a psychiatrist." I said, "Oh, I thought I must be seeing, you know, because I was pretty out of it. Oh, I thought I'd be seeing a cardiologist." And he said, "No, no, no, I'm a psychiatrist." But yes, you know, I do feel we are so much luckier now. And, you know, I wrote that book in 2014, and it's interesting that, you know, when it came out, loads of people said to me, "Oh, you're so brave," by which they sort of really meant, "Oh, you're actually a bit foolhardy," you know, because even, you know, 2021, even in those 6, 7 years, you know, there has been a really quite a big shift in terms of reducing stigma and opening up the conversation. And you know, I think one of the really good things about lockdown is that a whole another, you know, cohort, as it were, have been tipped into understanding the importance of mental health. And it's very hard now not to take it with the due seriousness. I mean, we've got to get services and you know, up to speed to match the demand. And I'm sure that's something you're, you know, more aware of than me, actually, you know, within the NHS, because a lot of the people I'm working with, you know, they're very distraught, and they're worried about long delays for counselling or long delays to get to see a psychiatrist, or, you know, so I think it's almost like we've done a lot of talking now, but now we've got to catch up with actually providing the services and everything. Yeah. Just one thing, actually, going back to that poem, I don't want to not point it out. You know, the last line, it says, "I did sit and eat." And it's so interesting because when I was so ill, what I really wanted was just like be able to sit down and have a meal with my family, and, you know, be well enough to do that. And I think that, I know that's something you're really interested in as well as nutrition, but that point that, you know, food is a big part of kind of both recovery and also, you know, looking after yourself and prevention as well. But yeah, sorry, I'm going off at a tangent here.
No, you're not. I really couldn't agree more. I mean, that is like my absolute foundation is, you know, good food, good mood. And I think it is so important, and such a relationship that's so overlooked, and it is really, you know, so short-sighted when you
How did you first come across that? Who sort of pointed it out to you? Because it's not very widely taught in medical schools, is it?
I know, no, it's not taught at all. That's my kind of passion area of where I'm driving at the moment. So we're driving it in all specialties, from cancer to heart health, but psychiatry is obviously where my passion's at. Where did I first come across it? It's really quick. I wrote an essay about it in my second year at medical school, which was 6 years ago.
Wow.
I can't, you know, it's really hard to unpick how my mind went there, but I think it's from what I was probably seeing from myself. So at medical school, at medical school, I had a very much anxiety-driven depression as well. I was always running on such high energy, and always from this get-go, I just wanted to achieve, socialize, just never giving myself a break. And I found that when I was stressed, comfort eating was my absolute outlet. And I just always loved food. And then I began to really notice within myself when I overdid it with comfort eating, and how much it would make my mood so much worse, and I'd notice how lack of sleep would make me reach for more sugary refined options the next day. So I
Yeah.
started kind of putting all the connections together on a kind of intuition level, and then I started looking at the research, looking at Prof. Elise Jacka's work over in
Oh
Australia,
yeah,
the
great.
SMILES trial. And
Yeah,
ever since then, I feel like all I've done is consume nutritional psychiatry knowledge, and I know it's just
brilliant.
absolutely the field I want to be in. And it was really interesting because with anxiety, just from my personal experience, I comfort ate and overate to kind of fill a hole in me. And then when I was really
Yeah.
depressed, I couldn't eat. And it's just
No,
so it's so
I
interesting, these two kind of ends of the spectrum. Yeah.
that's so true. I mean, I remember when the first major depressive episode happened, I literally, I mean, I thought I could hardly, I mean, I remember trying to sip some miso soup and I
Mm,
literally couldn't eat it. And it was so funny because it's like when you lose a lot of weight very quickly, it's actually very alarming.
mm,
And you know, of course, always one thinks, oh, I'd like to lose a bit of weight, and then suddenly you do lose a lot of weight very suddenly, and it's actually quite scary. I'm exactly the same. And I think even though anxiety and depression are connected, and one could lead
yeah.
to the other, it's very interesting that there are those differences. And as you say, with anxiety, and I'm exactly the same. You know, I'll go for something, you know, soothing and a biscuit or a muffin or something. You know,
Yeah, yeah,
got a
absolutely.
sort of association from childhood, like, you know, this will make it all better.
Mm.
Where was I reading recently the idea that is it that depression is regret and looking at things from the past that you regret, and anxiety is more looking at things you're worried about in the future?
Future.
I don't know if
Mm.
you've heard that distinction.
Yeah, no, completely. I've heard that as
Yeah,
well.
I
Because
thought
I think
that was quite
anxiety,
interesting.
you're anticipating something. I know that when I speak to most people who've experienced anxiety, and from myself, you get into a cycle from what you're anticipating rather than just waiting for the moment to come. Whereas I felt
Yes.
personally when I was depressed, I was literally unpicking. And I remember my therapist giving me this analogy, which was so useful. And I still say it to myself today. She says, put the shovel down. I remember trying to unpick every single thing from, you know, year back. And it's really interesting that you mentioned that. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. So I work a lot with the idea of like thought stopping. So just like, okay, here we go. Thoughts of tumbling in a very, you know, negative, either catastrophizing or, you know, typical negative thought patterns. And the one I like is just to say to myself, these thoughts are not helpful right now.
Mm.
These thoughts are just not helping me right now. So I'm just gonna stop these thoughts. They're not helping me right now. They are not serving me right now. And that sort of thought stopping, it's very simple, but it can actually be very very helpful.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I do that the most when, because I mean, before I fell into a depressive episode, I never appreciated sleep. Like from a young child, I was always a difficult sleeper, and then as a teenager, I'd always be up late doing essays at the last minute. I just never appreciated sleep, and the same thing happened when I got to medical school. And then only once I went on my kind of healing journey did I realize just how much lack of sleep affects my mood. So I know now when I've not had a good night's sleep, I know that it has an impact on my mood. So the minute I know that I go into an overthinking cycle, I say, stop, you're tired. These thoughts don't mean anything. Just leave
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
Because when I'm tired, I want to kind of excavate my mind with the shovel and go deeper and deeper because I'm irritable.
I
Yeah.
love putting the shovel down. That's really good. I think these visual things, a bit like the butterfly, or you
Mm.
know, sometimes thinking of the thoughts as the clouds and letting them pass. And these visual images can be really helpful. I quite like that one about halt, like if you're hungry, angry, lonely, or tired.
Oh, I
Like,
haven't heard that. Oh, is that
but it's
what you need to question it? Mm-hmm.
well, it's like if you know if a lot of you know if you're you know triggering the stress response or a lot of anxious thoughts are coming up, just you say to yourself, halt. So obviously stop, halt, but and then check: are you hungry, angry, lonely, or tired? And if you're any of those, you know,
I
just
love that. Oh my
don't
gosh.
don't act on them till you've put those things right. But it's
Mm.
interesting the sleep one because all my depressive episodes have started with really chronic ongoing and on insomnia,
Mm.
and I still you know do get a bit anxious. I mean I have to watch, like for example, I don't schedule a lot of things first thing in the morning because that's an almost certainty that I will then, you know, not sleep at all. Pretty, I mean, depending, I mean, particularly early morning travel, that is just a killer for me. But the thing that's made a big difference has been like, it's not the lack of sleep itself, it's actually worrying about the lack of sleep.
Yeah.
So I try and then use some of the other ideas to sort of, you know, get away from the worry about it. Yeah. Do you allow yourself to have a nap to catch up, or how do you sort of get yourself not to worry if you're lying there wide awake?
I genuinely don't remember the last time I had a sleepless night, which is such an
Really?
epic thing for me to say because I always had insomnia. And the amount, I'm so all about holistic approaches with any physical or mental health condition. You know, I'm passionate about nutrition, physical activity, all of that. But my God, have I abused sleeping pills over the years, because that's always been my big area of no can do. But now I'm in a really good rhythm where I actually haven't had that issue in a really long time, because I have like a journal where I brain dump. So I never really go to sleep with worries that are unresolved. And if they
Yes.
are there, they're not actually real worries that need acting upon. It's just my brain doing silly things.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I think a notepad and pen is a really nice thing
Yeah,
to have.
so
Kind of just
useful.
write it down, and also I quite like using the Serenity Prayer. I used that last night. So you know, how does it go? Give me the wisdom to know what I can change, to understand what I can't, and the sort
Is
of
that
the
the AA one that they
yeah, I
use?
think it is.
Similar.
I haven't said it quite right. I bet you other somebody
Mm.
else knows it, but and the wisdom to know the difference. So basically, you know, or the sort of ideas with worry logs when you know you write down what you can do, you know, worries you can act on, worries that you can't act on, and then using some of the sort of loving kindness meditations. I use those a lot as well, which are really nice. You know, meditations like, you know, I'm always learning and growing, and things like just sort of talking to yourself in that, you know, back it in a way, in a very sort of gentle way.
Yeah, and something, yeah, I think that's really useful. And something else that I think is really helpful is my recently done a series of performance coach sessions, which have been absolutely incredible. Just really have opened my eyes up to the idea of growth mindset. And he taught me a template to use for worries and for kind of anxieties. And is it a high stake, is it a medium stake, or is it a low stake? And if you can like categorize things, so oh my God, I don't know what I'm gonna have for breakfast in the morning because
That's
I
low
ran out
stake.
of my favorite cereal. Obviously that's a low stake, so you're like, Ali, don't be ridiculous, like there's a solution to that. But then obviously if it travels up and you realize, oh gosh, that actually really is a little bit of a life or death situation, then you can kind of brain dump in the journal and really be solutions based around it.
Okay, that's really nice. The other one I like as well is the idea that the physical symptoms for fear and anxiety are the same as the physical symptoms as for excitement. So if you can reframe it and, you know, say your heart's racing and, you know, you've got a big meeting or a bit of whatever it is that you're worried about, just think, okay, can I think of this? This is just my body saying I'm excited. And actually, I think that's very useful for some of these re-entry workshops that I'm doing at the moment. Is that, yes, you know, I know this is a difficult time for lots of people, but it is also a time for a bit of a reset and, you know, maybe thinking about aspects of your identity that you want
Yeah.
to develop or aspects of your identity that you want to leave behind. And I think in a way I feel quite lucky, but because of the major depression and I had to really sort of re-find a new identity. I sort You know, it's not like any of us have done re-entry
This is
before.
exactly what I wanted to ask you about, kind of what your relationship is with your pre-morbid self, you know, and how you are now.
I mean, I honestly feel so happy now, and I can hardly imagine the anxious person that I was. I mean, I just feel, you know, I feel quite emotional about how lucky I
Yeah.
feel. I mean, I basically, you know, I quite like the idea that, you know, it's not like we're going to go to no anxiety. You know, that is not possible. We're all descendants of people who, you know, ran away from lions and all the rest of it. But I think I've gone from sort of routinely living at 8 or 9 out of 10 anxiety
Yeah.
to going to a sort of manageable 3 or 4. And then if it hops up, I can get it back down again. And it's not like, you know, of course I'd still get stressed from time to time, but I've got a kind of capacity now to sort of line up with my joy and find things that I find joyful. And I feel really lucky because I'm just mad about my work. You know, I just find it so interesting, and like,
it's your purpose, and I think that's what's also such an important part of recovery, purpose.
yeah, and I feel like, you know, yeah, I'm just so lucky because I feel I'm, you know, I'm so lucky to be able to connect with people and chat to them and find out about them. And it's almost like nothing they can say in this field is ever boring to me.
Yeah.
And I'm constantly learning, like, you know, even after this conversation, you know, that so I've like learned some new ideas, like, you know, high stakes, medium stakes, low stakes. I love that, and put the shovel down. And so it seems to me that this journey is just going to kind of continue till I'm, you know, in my 80s or whatever. And it's so nice to feel connected to other people who are interested in the
Yeah.
same thing. And, you know, I did really like the Times. It wasn't like, I mean, it was a kind of exciting job. And
Can imagine.
yeah, there was some really fun bits of it. And I had some great colleagues and really good friends. And I've kept the element of writing and communicating. So I haven't totally left that job. But, you know, I've just, you know, because of what's happened, you know, it's, I don't regret what's happened to me. You know, it's made me.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask you about. You know, how did you get to that level of acceptance around everything that happened? How far into your recovery did you actually get to that kind of acceptance stage? Like, this happened for a reason. I'm still here.
Yeah.
And it is
Well,
what it is.
yeah, I actually got to it fairly early on, in the sense that when I was still really, really ill and on a lot of medication, I was, I mean, I had different psychiatrists who treated me, but one of them said, you know, the more you fight and, you know, what you persist resists, or whatever it is, what you resist persists.
Okay,
So,
that's lovely.
yeah, so the more you kind of fight what's happening and the more you can allow it and accept it. Um, and just feeling, as you say, that actually, you know, this is, you know, I know it's a bit cliched and everything's for a reason, the idea that everything's for a reason, but I think that back to that quotation for Corinthians, that my strength is made perfect in weakness, that there was something positive would come out of it. So I got to some of those ideas quite early on, and I think I was lucky because I hate waste. I'm so good with leftovers. I mean, honestly, nothing goes to waste in my house. And I was like that when I worked at the newspaper at the Times. I never wasted a story. Like, I would always recycle it or put it into reports. And I feel like what's so lucky for me is that what happened has not gone to waste. And there was a dark period when, because I was very ill for around 2 years. I always know it was about 2 years because I couldn't pick my children up from school, and one of our sons was given this prize for bravery for the fact that, like, I not being able to pick him up, and I always sort of judged that as that was about the amount of time I was really quite ill. And it felt like at the time that, you know, this was a real waste. I had sort of got to the acceptance, but I hadn't got to the being at peace with, you know, I'd thrown away this time, especially as I'd not been able to be there for the children. So I think that's really, I suppose, in a way, why I'm much more content now, is I feel, no, I haven't wasted this. You know, I've been able to share my experience, and I've been able to, you know, learn and grow and hear from others as well. So yeah, I think it's all been recycled.
I love that. Recycling the bad times and making
Yeah.
meaning out. Exactly. Recycling the waste into something more meaningful for another use. And I think that's exactly what you've done with your work. And that's exactly what I hope to do too. And I think there's one stage where it's acceptance, and then there's another stage after that where it's let's make meaning out of it, because that's what we strive to do as humans.
Yes.
I think it's that idea of transcendence where you think, well, there's actually a whole world out there. My problems are only a drop in the ocean. It's, you know, everything's much bigger than me in itself, and if I can put my tiny little story to be able to affect the masses, you know, it will really transcend through the generations. Like, look at George Herbert, that just that tiny poem from way back when is having an impact with you today, and, you know, hopefully people will be reading this in centuries to come as well. And I think it's just really powerful, and that's what I love about the writing. It's like you're leaving a legacy as well through all your poetry and through all the work that you do. So yeah, can you talk a little bit more about writing, and just, I know we've only got around 10 minutes left, but just also bring us up to speed with your latest book, How to Sing in the Rain.
Yes, sure. Um, it's interesting, yeah, just a couple of points there, that, that idea of things being of use. So in fact, George Herbert was going to burn all his poems, and he was
Mm.
dying, and he said to this friend, only publish them. And his exact phrase was, if you think they're of use for a poor dejected soul. So
Wow.
I think that sense of being of use, and
Mm.
as you say, not to get into a sort of kind of a numbers game. I think if ever I think, oh, I should sell more books or get more people to come to my talks, or I actually don't want to get in that at all. I want to get in that idea of kind of like I am connecting with you, Ali, right now, and connecting hopefully with anybody
Mm.
listening. And I really like that idea of a sort of not a sort of. I think sometimes all the numbers things can sort of drive
Yeah,
some.
it's the real quality. It's as simple as quality over quantity.
Yes,
If
and
one
sort of
person can
horizontal
take
in a
away
way.
a strategy rather than it
Yes.
all go over the heads of 20. Mm.
Yes, yes. So yeah, those are big sort of principles of mine. I mean, I think that I really like writing. I'm really interested in some of the ideas of, I can never pronounce him, but you'll probably have heard of him. The Hungarian psychologist. He's called Csikszentmihalyi. He's got his
I
really
haven't heard
hard
of them.
spelling.
Go.
I'll find it for you. But he came up in the 70s with the idea of being in the flow.
Mhm.
So being in the flow is when we find an activity where our competence matches the
Oh, it's flow
challenge.
state. Yeah, my coach taught me about this. Yeah, amazing.
Yeah. And for me, writing does that. And
Mm.
the more I focus on like fiddling around, in fact, look, I can just show you here. This is the text of another book that I'm uh, working on. I want to write about parenting, and I want to write about how parents can learn to be less worried. But the fact is that when I'm sort of fiddling with a sentence, time passes in a really lovely way. I don't notice it. I'm
Mm.
focused. I'm in the moment. My competence matches the challenge. Obviously I'm no Shakespeare, but I can, I can endeavor to do the best sentence that I can do. And so for me, writing is very therapeutic in that way, because it gives me that chance to be in the flow. Um, and then there's that kind of sense of creativity, and as you say, that of making something out of this, some of these difficult things that have happened, and sort of having something permanent. And as you say, I don't know, maybe someone somewhere in the future or even now might, find something that connects
Mm.
them. So yeah, I mean, and I think there's another thing for me as well, is that I do think language and writing and the words we use, so the stories we tell ourselves and the words, the sort of voice we use to ourselves is really important. And I give you, for example, I'm sure you've heard of lots of the ideas that, gratitude is really good for us, and a gratitude notebook. And I think that's right. And there's lots of data there. But I don't like the word gratitude. I much prefer the word appreciation,
Mm.
sort of gentler, and it's kind of calmer, and it's just less demanding. And if you're not feeling great, oh, I've got to be grateful, it feels a bit judgmental.
Mm.
And so I'm really interested in how language affects how we kind of respond to things. So I'll give you another one. So of course we all know exercise is really good, but for me exercise has a bit of a should and an ought, and
I
ought
agree.
is a
That's
bit
what I
kind of,
say. Movement.
yeah, I love movement, and it gets away
Mm.
from the goal centered, the
100%.
5K, and so it's sort of lining up with your joy. So whether if that's dancing, in itself it's valuable and important, and you enjoy it for that reason. So I think that's another reason, I suppose, that language and writing is really important for me. And yes, you kindly mentioned my most recent book. So yeah, I've taken different approaches. So Black Rainbow was particularly looking at poetry and how that can be healing, and being very unwell, when sometimes I think you have to kind of go deeper, and poetry does that. I did my Happy Kitchen cookbook, and that's nutrition and mental health and good mood food and how that works. And I did that with a lovely nutritionist called Alice McIntosh. I did a book called Walking on Sunshine, which was more meditative, a sort of diary of my year, of sort of how to rethink things and reframe them. So how we could, maybe look at things a bit differently. So, even something simple like, movement rather than exercise. But then this most recent one, Singing in the Rain, is that I became very interested in the idea that, which was true for me, that you can become very dependent on outsiders, whether that's psychologists or therapists or psychiatrists, and we can lose our own sense of agency that we can personally make a difference. So that's a very practical book. It's a workbook, and you can just fill it in and do it yourself. And the groups I've worked with, some of them working through all the book, we've worked through the book together. They talk, and I found that it just gives people a sense that they can make a difference. So it's delicate because, of course, your socioeconomic circumstances, if you're struggling for housing, or you've just lost your job, or you're facing bereavement, yes, there's no doubt that our outward circumstances affect our mental health. But I think that we can feel more empowered and have more of a sense of agency if we can at least feel that we too can take some steps, and sort of it's less circumstances but how we respond to them. And doing these sorts of exercises in the book, can help. So yeah, that's that. You fill it in, and it's got lots of fun pictures.
I like that, interactive.
Yeah, definitely.
And so do you have two books on the go at the moment? So the nature one and the parenting one?
Yeah, so so I finished the nature one using poetry. So that's hopefully coming out around Christmas. I'm really excited. I think it's going to be illustrated, and it's going to look, because I want it to be sort of very aesthetically part of the whole experience. So that's called You'll Never Walk Alone. So that's sort of done and dusted. And then I'm working on this parenting one, and I'm working on that one with a clinical psychologist who's a lovely lady called Carla Croft. And we've been sort of chatting about, really the thing that I'm interested in is that parents have just become so worried. They're so worried about young people. They're so worried about being parents, and can we still enjoy being parents? And I'm particularly interested in teenagers, because sort of small children, small problems, big children, bigger problems. And as a mum for teenagers myself, I want to think, are there other things we can do to be less worried as parents of teenagers? Because there's been such a lot of noise and talk about, how difficult our teenagers are finding life. And I'm trying to kind of cut my way through the research and what's really going on. One of the things I found, and I don't know if you know this, is actually we've got very little research, practically no good research about teenagers. Most of the studies we've got on anxiety, depression, they're on adults. So even that has been interesting, in the course of researching this book, of how little we really know about even the teenage brain. We know, the studies are mainly on the adult brain. So it's lovely. I feel I'm learning a lot, and hopefully a book will come out of it in the end. But meanwhile, I'm sticking to being in the flow. So
how do you balance that? Oh, there's a book coming out of me at the end that's actually going to be commercialized, with being in the moment and doing it for yourself. How do you balance those two aspects?
It's really interesting. I mean, I think if you want to go through the traditional publishing route, I mean, you have to be respectful of publishers, kind of where art and commerce meet. They have to feel that that they would be able to sell some books. And it doesn't, if a publisher doesn't take you on, it doesn't necessarily mean that what you haven't done is significant and artistic and important. It just means that it might not have that kind of commercial edge. I mean, I suppose that for me now, so I'm on my 7th and 8th books. I've got about another 4 books I want to write. I mean, for me, this whole area is so interesting and so compelling. And I sort of feel that, yes, I'd like to work with publishers because I like collaboration and I like that whole process. But actually, we're in a really exciting time. If you feel you've got something to say and you want to share, the digital world means that it's very possible. There is no, in the old days, a publisher had a barrier to being able to connect with people who would be interested in your content. And the digital world means that's really not true. So as I say, I have always worked with traditional publishers, but I also feel quite sort of relaxed that actually, that I may not always do that. There's other ways to connect with your community and people that you're interested in your work. So, and I think that would be true of you or true of other people listening. And, it's not a numbers game. It's just about connecting with the people that...
Absolutely. I think, connection is one of my foundational values. And I just think it's one of the most powerful things that we can do. And I know that it's something like when I'm having a good day, it's because I'm connecting. And it's kind
with
of my
yourself, foremost, and then you get that connection with others. And yeah, so yeah, I think that's so very, very true for me. And I mean, I know this maybe sounds really obvious, but it's only a really recent thing that I've been working on in therapy, is this idea of, our main relationships with ourselves, and that's not a selfish thing, as I think I mentioned before, but it's if we nourish and look after ourselves, then we can be available and make a difference to others. And
completely, it's just the simple, put your own oxygen mask on first before you can put on for other people. And I think that's so true, and it's something that I've really had to kind of I've had to unlearn everything and reteach myself, because going into a caring profession like medicine, I always thought was about others, it was about others, it was about others. But I've realised, if I can't look after myself and I can't, fill my own jug up, then I'm never going to be able to look after others in the optimal way that I know that I want to. So it's so important.
Do you think that's a bit more gendered? Do you think it's women as, I mean, I sometimes I wonder if it, or do you think it's for men, or I don't know. I wonder if there's a sort of I don't know if it's a hormonal thing there, or whether that's just, it can just depends on who you are.
Yeah, I guess it depends on who you are, because I mean, my mom is like the best mom ever, so she's like my baseline of being a giver. And my dad is lovely, but I'd say he's probably I won't go into it, but yeah, I don't know, to be honest with you. I think it's probably a personality type, but then there's probably an evolution aspect to it, of the maternal side of things and being giving.
I'm interested because women often present with depression more than men. And I know sometimes people say, well, that's because men don't come forward and they're just as much in need of treatment. And but then there's this sort of idea that women are more, as you say, more the caring profession. And so so I'm in my mid-50s, and a lot of my girlfriends, there's elderly parents, they've still got teenage children, and it's an interesting area where, that, and actually there was a very interesting bit of research I looked at on re-entry syndrome, saying that the women under 40 were most vulnerable to finding it difficult coming out of lockdown. So yeah, it's just interesting looking at different, as you say, different areas.
And when you think of parents, I never really hear about a neurotic, the stereotype is the neurotic mother, the anxious mom. I never really, and just from like anecdotally, I can't think of any anxious dads. But maybe that's harsh, especially because I know that there's so much work on paternal postpartum depression and things like that, which are really real.
And actually, I think it's in terms of the stigma conversation, men
really
talking about mental health has been
it's so important.
Because
and it could be because they're not talking about it. Exactly, they are anxious, but they're bottling it up. So I don't know if it's, I don't think we'd be able to say really without more information. But I just wanted to finish off with last couple questions. So I know that in your book, that one of the parameters for you to know that you were doing better and getting on that path of wellness was being busy. And you sound like a very busy lady, back-to-back books, and you're a mom of 5 if I'm not incorrect. So how do you deal with the balance of busyness and self-care, like what we've just spoken about? So not always putting pressure on yourself to be productive, but just kind of chilling out and doing stuff for yourself that has no goal around it.
It's been a battle for me, and I do slip back into, on the one hand, obviously when I was very unwell, I couldn't do anything, so being able to pick up a life was a sign of recovery. But as you rightly say, there's a fine line between being over busy and overstretched, and I think that's where I have to watch it the most, is that I can take on too much, and I can, I've got a great tendency to say yes, and I've had to sort of learn how to say no. I mean, I think some of the breathing work and self-awareness work, and a little bit like you were saying, like if you'd had a bad night, just to be very alert to those physical symptoms. So even now, because it's such an exciting week, Mental Health Awareness Week, and I've been doing a lot of events, I can notice a little catch in my throat. And that's just saying, you've been talking quite a lot, probably, watch it, slow down. I have a phrase I use a lot: keep your spaces. So I use the diary. I still use an old-fashioned pen and paper diary. That's probably because I'm not very good at the digital thing, but also to literally sometimes just put a line through the diary, and I'll put a whole week, and it will just be a sort of reset, replenish, recharge week. And even though I'm actually not doing anything, and even I'm just sitting at home, I've sort of made a decision that that's a replenish week.
Yeah.
But I struggle with it. I still have to work on it, because I think that's how I used to get my validation and status is, you know, I'm busy, I'm doing this and doing that. And I think I just have to feel that I'm good enough anyway. And even though I've been telling you about these books, it's sort of like, actually, I'm okay even if I wasn't doing any books. I've still got something to say.
It's that idea of innate resilience. You are okay with whatever you do, and getting out of that habit of conditional thinking that if I
Yeah,
publish 7 books, I'll be the best version of myself and things like
yeah,
that. And
yeah,
you know, it's definitely something I struggle with as well. And I saw an amazing meme the other day, and I think it was, don't mistake your free time, your me time, for availability for others, or something like that. So just
yeah.
because it's your free time, it doesn't mean that it can be encroached by you know, making arrangements and saying yes to people. You've created that space for yourself. It is restricted.
Yeah, I mean, the thing I
Yeah.
do as well now is I always, even if it's something I really want to do, I say, let me think about that. Well, I try to. Actually, when we first got chatting, I said, yes!
Yeah, but, and I'm glad you did, because I wouldn't have let you said no.
Yeah, but I do
Yeah.
try, like if I'm invited to do something, I do try to just say, can I get back to you, or let me
Yeah.
think about it.
No, I
Just
think
do
that's
that
actually
little
really good
pause.
advice. That is really good advice.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
last question, I know that in your book that you had quite a lot of denial around medication in the beginning of your illness, and how that was the kind of indicator of I am ill, and that was your loss of identity by taking the pills. How is your relationship with medication now when you look back on it? And
yeah.
with
It's
people
really
that you speak
interesting
to?
because it's such a hot area, you know, and there are both people very passionately like pro medication, but there are also people who think that we're over medicating. The fact is that if you are suicidal and you are in a psychiatric hospital, you take the medication. I mean,
Exactly.
it's like, it's just sort of unthinkable that you wouldn't. If you're extremely, you know, you're in so much pain, it's just like you are frantic for anything to get out of that terrifying place. So I suppose the real issue comes when you start to recover, and then it's quite more tricky, because I think, of course, if you can then manage to wean yourself slowly off the medication, you know, you feel, you know, that's great, and I'm able, you know, I'm this is a sign of recovery. Even saying that, I think it's very personal, and I think it's a very difficult area, and I'm very cautious of even commenting, because I'm not a
Yeah.
psychiatrist. So I'm only
No,
really,
I mean, I'm just curious because
yeah,
for
for my
someone like,
experience, yeah,
yeah,
for my experience, I felt that I really like pulling in these other things, because I felt quite powerful. And even though medication, you know, as I say, was absolutely life-saving, using some of the nutritional approaches, using some of the reading approaches, the poetry approaches, these exercises, the psychological workbook, they just made me feel more powerful, and that
yeah,
I was in
it's
control a bit more.
empowering, of course,
Yeah,
agency.
yeah,
Yeah,
and actually, in a really practical matter, I didn't have to wait to get an appointment. I mean, and that might sound really silly, but I could actually, especially
that's true. It's on your own terms. It makes it
yeah,
more challenging as well, though, because you have to be motivated to be able to engage with one of those kind of self-care well-being strategies. So I
that's
think it's
true.
for when you're well. I think for me, I view it as kind of like a maintenance toolkit when you're well, but when you're so ill and in crisis, I think medication has the perfect place, because it deals with the
Absolutely,
acute situation, and it takes the kind of stress away from you.
absolutely. No, I mean, you know, if it hadn't been for getting that proper psychiatric help, I wouldn't be here now.
Yeah,
I mean, that's the beginning and end of it. But
absolutely.
and then,
Yeah.
you know, I feel very lucky that I'm now in a position when I can, as you say, stay calm and well in other ways. But you never know. I mean, my mum died
Yeah.
years ago. I had a very difficult patch, and you know, I did manage to, using all my strategies, I was okay. But who's to say? You know, one of my
Yeah.
children was very ill. I would never really.
Yeah, you never you keep open minded, and I think
Yeah,
that's what the most important thing is, because you know, when you get too kind of fixed on being too purist, which you know so many people are, like I've had to have so many conversations with people who won't take the vaccine, and when
yeah,
you become too purist and like, I just want my body to fight it and all of this, you know, our
yeah,
bodies are amazing, our minds are amazing, but there is sometimes a huge need to have external help. I mean, I'm right now on antidepressants and trying to wean myself off them, but I'm very chilled with, you know, the process of how long that takes and, you know,
Yeah,
whether it works or doesn't,
yeah.
because
And
it's
I
just one of
have to
those
say,
things. Yeah.
I always have an emergency medication kit.
Mm.
So, for example, my books have been published in America and various other countries, and I had to do an overseas book tour. It was my idea of absolute hell, but it was also exciting. And I had you know, I had some, you know, medication there, you know, entirely working with my GP by that point. And she said, you know, just so you can have it as a backup, you know, where we,
Yeah.
you know, you add in jet lag to insomnia and a need to be, you know, up and about.
Perform, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
So, I mean, you know, why would you take that away? You know, so
Really.
it'd be, I mean,
Yeah.
it's unconscionable, really.
No, we're on the same page, and I think it's, yeah, it's so brilliant to chat about the nuances, because I think a lot of the time the media miss the nuances, and it's either pro medication or anti, not that kind
Yeah.
of middle ground of there's so many pieces to the puzzle of mental illness recovery. You can rely on so many different things. It doesn't have to be all in one camp. So I think it's so important.
Yeah. And I think actually that maybe that also really sums up my whole approach as well, which is that, you know, everybody's very different. The stresses they're facing are very different. And that's why I know it's a cliche, the sort of the toolkit thing, but you know, you might need different things at different stages. You might need more of them. You might need less of them. You know, as I say, when my mum was really, you know,
Mm.
that whole process of nursing her and then her dying, I really went back to poetry. You know,
Yeah.
that's when the chips are really down for me, that has a kind of depth to it which I can't find elsewhere. So things move around all
Comes
the
from
time.
the soul, really.
Yeah, and also we're all changing all the time, you know,
Yeah.
never more so than now. So what we need changes as well, so
Mm.
that's okay.
Well, I think we'll leave it there. And just to say, thank goodness you're still here on this earth, because I learned so much from this conversation and from so much of your books. And it's just been such a pleasure talking to you. And
Well,
I hope to do lots of work with you soon.
well, here's to collaborating, sticking together. Thank you so much. It's been my total pleasure too.
Have a lovely evening.
You
Lots of
too.
love.
Blow in the
Bye.
kiss. Lots of love. Bye bye.